Welcome everyone to a new AMA session, Ask Me Anything session that the dev advocacy group within BrowserStack are going to be regularly holding. This is going to be things that we think anyone could be interested in hearing about, things that are going to affect your lives. Both Pooja and I, who are going to be doing the session, have years of experience in the space, and hopefully we can kind of have an interesting chat that you can learn from, and even in the future ask questions. You know how to get a hold of us through kind of the BrowserStack Discord or generally through any of our socials that are out there. So I'm David. I head up developer advocacy. I tend to struggle with that word, and the open source program office here at BrowserStack, looking at how we can influence open source projects for the good, not just how BrowserStack wants, but for the good and how the community needs it. And I'll let Pooja introduce herself.
Yeah, thank you, David, for just warming up everyone. Hello, everybody. My name is Puja Jagani. I am a lead here at BrowserStack. Again, doing developer advocacy and also open source engineering side of things. And I've been working actively in Selenium for about 4.5 years. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a discussion that came up earlier today of how long has both you and Pooja been working in open source, and I was like, Pooja's been around for a long time, and by long I mean in kind of business terms long. Uh, Being at one company for 4 years is a long time. So, but yeah, no, that's amazing. Right, so this is going to be free flowing. We have a bunch of ideas that we would like to get through. I can ask Pooja questions, Pooja can ask me questions. I think we'll just go through it as that. And then if we have any other thoughts along the way, do ask questions, and we will try slot them in as we see fit. So, Pooja, like you've seen large projects. So before BrowserStack, you were working in Silicon Valley, and you saw large projects there. Um, and as an engineer, how much automation generally did you see being required? Um, and like, how much is too much? How much is too little? Like, what was the kind of the gut feel that you were kind of taught along the way?
I think probably I'm not sure with the gut feeling that I was taught because that depends from team to team and how they approach and how they think and how they structure their teams. Uh, but I think eventually what I learned down the line, what ideally potentially makes sense. I think at any point, again, it's automation is important, but again, it's not everything. When I say it's not everything, that I mean you don't have to automate everything. Um, One doesn't also need to replace manual testing. Both have its own space and for a good reason. But
Mm.
it's important to automate your crucial flows, your important user stories, things that are time consuming, essentially things that would free up your team's time so they can do more productive things, more creative things, probably more exploratory kind of things where they can go and, really challenge the code that exists in ways that probably you can't design automation to do it. So I think there's always a thin balance, but again, it depends on the project at hand and pretty much what it does. But I think it is important to automate in the sense you want to make sure that when you deliver code, your tests are automated, you're able to at least with confidence say that this works, right? And you have a proof of that somewhere that someone can go see that, hey, probably the CI, that my build works correctly. I did not break the build. I did not break tests. I did not introduce new bugs. Or if it's a new feature, at least with confidence that this works, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually quite important. Um, I tend to, because I've been an engineering manager for so long now, I tend to look at it as how can I make sure my team is being successful and impactful? Right? Like those, I know those are kind of very jargony words, but to me, an engineer is successful is when they are given a task and they deliver it. It should be really simple. how do you measure that they delivered it? Well, there should be tests to prove it, right? And so, yeah, like it is team by team specific. But I think it's important that we actually focus on the quality of the work that we put out, right? Like that is first and foremost. There's no, you can have too many tests. Don't let anyone suggest otherwise. But when I say too many tests, I think you're focusing generally in the wrong space of the test when I say that. So too many end-to-end tests or too many integration tests and not enough of these things. Puja and I have discussed these things before. The testing pyramid is really important in the space to be able to do the right thing. And Marit has this really fantastic phrase, and I will always give her the credit because it's just amazing. Is that when you're looking to see how much automation you need to know by how much manual testing you're doing. And then from there, it should be a cycle. Like the more you free up through automation to do more manual testing, you start kind of learning. And it's a cycle that you go through. It's not a linear growth, it's a cycle. One leads into the other, leads back into it. And it's really important to focus on it like that, I think. Yeah. Marit's amazing, by the way. So if you're not following Marit, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. And she's just a fantastic human being generally to chat to. Cool. I
think let me ask you, David, like, what do you think? How much should you automate? Because I know you have decades of experience through different domains or different journeys. So, what does your experience tell you?
Yeah. So Simon Stewart and I are fantastic friends, right? Like we've been doing open source through Selenium for literally nearly two decades, right? So and he once phrased it, and I think he said it perfectly, is that you should have one end-to-end test, just one. And his reason for that is that if I told you to do 10, you would do 10. But if I told you to do one, you would focus on the most important one. Right. And so you should always make sure your business logic is well tested. That should be done through your unit tests. And going back to Simon describes those as not as unit tests, but as small tests, right? Because sometimes you need to a unit is seen as a function or things like that, but sometimes you need to breach what is considered a unit test because it might stretch out into another interface. But that's also okay because it's going to be fast. It's small, it can be fast. Medium tests or integration tests, those should be fewer than your unit test or your small tests. And then your end-to-end test, there should be that one, but it's not necessarily one, right? Like don't, which is why he describes as the one, because people fixate on specific words and then go, I'm going to implement that specific wording you said, which is not the meaning behind it. And English is like generally quite a fluffy language. So sometimes, especially with people coming from other languages, and then they're like, oh, yes, Simon said 10, I will do 10. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Do important stuff, right? Like you kind of phrased it that way. It should be important, right? As an engineering manager, the word I tend to use is impactful. Like how much impact is that one test going to be? And you go, actually, that one test is the impact is 50% of what I really need to cover. Cool, add another one, right? But you've now focused on the impact and the importance. Now the number doesn't really matter anymore.
Yep, and I think
yeah, carry on.
yeah, no, I think that is a rare thought in terms of, because I know there's a very wide belief or a thought process or a mindset about, again, when it comes to numbers, like, people tend to fixate on numbers. And when it comes to testing, one thing people fixate on is code coverage, right? So they get carried away that, we need to automate everything. We need 100% code coverage. I have 100% code coverage. We automate everything. You know what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah, it's uh, and I'm not meaning this to bash the BDD folks, so I'm going to preface it with that. But it's the same people who fixate on code coverage will also say that you need to have BDD tooling, behavior-driven development tooling, right? There is a time and a place for literally everything, right? And so behavior-driven development BDD is really good and it allows certain people to understand what a test should be doing, right? And I use the word should because I think it's really important that it should and reality could be two different things,
No.
right? But the same could be said for normal testing, right? So it's easier sometimes just to be able to read the code and go, oh yeah, that's good. But yeah, code coverage, I think it's useful. The thing that's useful in it is that it tells you if impactful code is not being touched, right? And so I thought, like, I'm trying to think of a concrete example. My favorite, right? Python, because I'm a Python developer. I've been Python developer for a long time. Went through this phase when it moved from Python 2 to Python 3. And one of the key problems that Python 2 had was around how strings are formatted internally. And so they were done around ASCII. Now, ASCII is really useful in the UK, Australia, and the US, right? I'm not saying Canada because like Canada's got French Canadian. They have a need for Unicode, right? But that's very limited space. Unicode is actually really useful because there are other things that we could start putting into it, but Python just didn't have it. And so I could have 100% code coverage on my Python 2 code, but if I introduced a Unicode character, and it would have a failure or not, I would still have 100%. Like it doesn't tell me the quality of the tests. And that's where I really start disliking it. Like I see it as useful for the bits it's not touching. Because those should be touched or not. You need to make judgments. But it doesn't tell you the quality. And I really like I get fixated. Like QA teams are not QA teams to me, really, like because you can't assure quality. Like it's just a misnomer. But fixating on that, the areas that need improving, the areas that are impactful, are those impactful areas being touched? Yes, no, and then make a decision, right? I have the same thought beliefs around AI as well. AI, I don't think is necessarily going to understand the impact of what it is doing or how it is doing. You kind of generally need that human touch along the way.
And I think that's absolutely true. And I think that's going to be true always, right? Because um, AI works on context, and there's only so much context. I mean, even if you think about it, even to humans, like between you and I, no matter how much knowledge sharing that goes on between us, I can pretty much never get the context that's there in your brain because brain is a complex, it's a complex organ. And I don't think we can ever feed that into AI, no matter what we do. Right?
Yeah.
So for simple problems, it might be straightforward. Okay, that makes sense. So AI has its own place, but when it comes to dealing complex problems, I think the first problem starts with trying to make AI understand what you have in your head. And we can't always do it even right with another human being. So forget doing it with a chatbot machine or anything else that can pretty
Yeah.
much do this with that accuracy.
Yeah, exactly. To me, it's like if you speak to someone on Slack or IRC or something like that, how you can easily talk past each other, even though you're saying the exact same thing, and you get frustrated. And like you get onto a call, you see their body language, the little tells that you can't see, and text doesn't have it because text is not designed that way, and humans are social in that sense. So it's the same for me. So it's fun, I guess, but and it does have its uses. Don't get me wrong. I think we're over we're overdoing it on AI at the moment, and the pendulum will swing back at some point once we know
Yeah.
proper use cases. And there are some. So. Um, cool. All right. So since we're going back and forth, I think this is an important one. Because like you've done a little bit of Selenium, you've done a little bit of Appium work. Tackling different test environments can be hard, right? You've seen it with just generally Selenium, right? And then you throw in Appium and it's like, um, what have you learned like through your time of trying to figure out what is the right way to do it and how to do it?
Hmm. I think when it comes to right way, I'm not sure if it is the right way to do it. But first is um, identifying. I think let me pick a line from your book. It says, "Be where your users are." So if you're going to be testing in an environment, or say if I'm writing a feature, the way I typically do it is because again, Selenium is cross-browser, and then it follows standards. I typically run it on different browsers on my machine in my tests, um, and see if it works okay, and take it from there. But if you're developing an application at that point, it becomes very important to understand the target audience, where they will sit, what kind of devices they would have, and then begin slowly. And I also understand that there's not always a possibility to have access to the plethora of devices and OS combinations that exist, right? So that's where probably um, companies, depending on how big or small they are, they can have their own device farms, um, opt in for cloud provider services like BrowserStack. There are many other vendors out there, or even have their own CI/CD pipeline that again works on some machines they have rented on the cloud, and take it from there. But I would first suggest probably start small, understand the basic environments, get something working consistently in the environment that's accessible to you, and then build a CI/CD kind of a pipeline. Not necessarily CD. CD is the delivery part of it. The CI kind of it, where you're continuously integrating your code and you're seeing it work across the subset of environments that you pick that you want. Basically, you need to identify, right? Like it's like a checklist. You want to make sure that these are the top, say, 5 environments, 10 environments. I want to make sure if it works here, then we're okay to give it to my like to give it to my users after that, right? So I would probably think of it that way. What about you? Like how do you think about this? Because this is a difficult problem, and yes, Prospect does cater to it, but that is one way. But not everyone can always have access to that off the bat all the time, right?
Yeah. I think we could. So yes, I'm a big advocate of be where your users are. I also am pragmatic enough to know that is not always realistic, right? Um, One of the greatest lessons I learned in my time at Mozilla was how diverse infrastructure is around the world. Right. So I was fortunate to do a little bit of work on Firefox OS, and the idea with Firefox OS was to deliver cheaper devices to kind of poorer parts of the world where not everyone can afford $1,000 US dollar device, right? But still but try to get more people to the internet, because more people to the internet allows us to share knowledge, right? The internet is the greatest feat that I think humanity has ever created. It has its problems, but generally, like if you want information, you can go find it, and it's really useful that way. And so, yeah, I learned to be pragmatic enough to know that not everyone can afford the devices. I see this especially like Southern Asia, right, where iPhones are, compared to what people earn, are just stupidly expensive. Um, Yes, if you go speak to someone in tech in the US, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, we've launched our new startup and it's only available on iOS, right? Or we've launched our new thing and it requires a huge screen." It's like, no, like you can't do that. So I think this is where risk-based testing comes into it. What is the risk that we get it wrong, and how much damage can it do to not only like data being stolen, like those are obvious, or kind of people not being able to buy your product, but how could it impact your brand long term? And I think that's really, really important. So I see a lot of people, and this might be anecdotal, but like a lot of people moving away from fewer apps to more kind of web-based stuff, but still on the mobile phone, right? I was at a conference this week, and I was speaking to one of the other speakers there, and they said, "Oh, it's fascinating to see how 5, 6 years ago there were more homes that had a TV than had a computer, right, in their household. 5 years has moved on, and now there are more homes where there is one mobile device compared to a TV, right? And so how does that then change the way you think about the way you test, the way you do these things when you start seeing these societal changes? Then comes down to the risk side of it. And it's really like, and I find, because I like psychology, I find the psychology of all that really important, because then it allows us to create these diverse ways of thinking for testing and improving our products, which then leads to a whole raft of incredibly hard problems, right? Like the bigger your matrix grows, the more chances you have of flakiness being introduced, for example, because operating systems run very differently, browsers run very differently, kind of hardware runs very differently, like, and suddenly you just like start weeping in the corner, because it's quite painful. Like, I can't win. It's like, yeah, we know that, but let's try and make our lives easier along the way. And this is where I think the risk side of it comes out, because you can go, yes, I'm going to lose, say, 10% of the market if a bug is introduced there, but maybe I can fix it in a different way. Right. It doesn't need to be tests, right? Observability is another fascinating way that I think people should be thinking about these things.
Yep, I think the telemetry can tell a lot of data. There can be a lot of analysis, and I think data is the current gold or gold mine of things in general, which can drive a lot of businesses to do the right thing, like be it them starting tests, what their test data is telling them, to where they want their application or software to land.
Yeah, definitely. But at least starting with a plan, I think, is the big first step. A lot of people just go, oh, I'll throw it to the wind and see what sticks, right?
I think, David, I have a question for you. And I think, again, I think this is something we talk a lot about, and I think rightly so. So I think you mentioned the flakiness bit of it, right? So what do you, I mean, you already, I think, covered the ground that, where flakiness can introduce, but um, what do you think is the common notion that people have around flakiness in automate tests?
So I think the common notion that I think people have is Selenium is flaky, and that is the only problem that there is out there. Unfortunately, it's people get fixated on that, where I could give them data and I could show you that a Playwright test is probably just going to be as flaky as the Selenium test or Cypress, but in different ways. And I think it's definitely the psychology of it all. How you think about something really is important, but I can guarantee it's different to how I would do it, right? I'm sure it might have just been me, and I appreciate I can be weird and wonderful in my own unique way. But when I was at university, I used to get frustrated because like I would get marked down for the work that I had to do, and the professor would be like, "Well, I was expecting it in this shape," and I went, "Well, the output's the same. Why does it matter internally?" right? And I know that the way I wrote the code would be different to other people, and I could work out what everything was doing, and it was fine, but it was still frustrating. And then if you take that kind of as a base, how you think about you go into testing. I look at a test script and it goes, I need to log in, I need to click this button, I need to fill in this form. This is the outputs I expect. So step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Computers don't work that way. Right. And
I think
especially,
if they did, we would never achieve anything, right? It would be so slow.
yeah, exactly, right. And it's like scalability would be thrown, it has to be thrown out the window. I was trying to discuss this with someone the other day, but like, um like when we think about testing, um we do those steps, right? But then when we run code, the code needs to kind of run as fast as possible, and then it needs to be scalable. And we've come up with ideas like eventual consistency, right? Just think, taking a basic thing that we all
Mhm.
learn at university, eventual consistency. Um, it means it will eventually get into the database, right? Doesn't mean it'll happen straight away. It might go into a queue, it might go to kind of like an EDL layer, whatever. Like it'll be there somewhere, and then somehow it'll get into the backend. But then you write your test to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And you're like,
Yep.
none of that said wait 5 days for your data to get in there, right? Like, and I'm using 5 days. I'm being facetious with the 5 days because like there are times where like if you Google, right, the data needs to be replicated all around the world, and it could take days, right? That's
Yep.
the eventual
Easily.
that's the eventual consistency part, right? um like where the initial work is happening, that'll be very quick, but you don't know that sometimes. um and yeah, and then people start using JavaScript, right? And JavaScript, like I'm very fortunate. I got to work when I worked with Mozilla. I was there when Brendan Eich was there, and I've had great chats with him. I don't agree on a lot of the things he does as a person, but he is a smart person, right? And he has good, like, JavaScript had some good ideas in it. It was implemented badly, I think, is the best way to kind of describe it. Um, and yeah, then you're like, I want these things in 1, 2, 3, 4, but I'm going to use an asynchronous thing, and I'm never going to tell you when 1 is finished, or 2 is finished, or 3 is finished, or 4 is finished. But eventually we'll get there. And then flakiness is introduced, and we all kind of cry in the corner. Um,
Yes, and then to sprinkle in the mix, we want to run all the tests parallelly, and then there
uh,
is and then there is more havoc created, right, at that point.
oh yeah, exactly. Um, and I think part of the flakiness is also how, and this is a kind of pet peeve I have generally with our industry, is testers are seen as kind of somewhat lower class than a developer, right? Like, oh yeah, you just throw it over to them. It's like, no, like they think of the problem in a different way to you do, right? You
Yep.
need to treat them that way, especially like as someone who writes Selenium, Playwright, whatever, right? If they're a QA tester doing those things, you are a developer. You're writing code, so therefore you are a developer. And I'm willing to fight anyone on that comment, right? But you think of the problems in a different way, and you've got to solve harder problems. And like you said, the parallelism part. People don't tend to think of um, atomic tests, right?
Yep.
Those atomic tests are really important. Um, and then they go, oh, why is this failing? Or like this test is suddenly being catching data in like from another test. That's again another form of flakiness, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. I
Yeah.
didn't think of that problem.
Yeah, there have been times, at least because I've been a Java developer through and through, and there have been times where I wrote a single, like when I'm running tests sequentially, they run well. Parallelly, they don't. There are times when I run just one test, it's okay, but when I run all of them together parallelly, it breaks. Because some concurrency hell has broken loose in the background, and that's on the developer to go fix, to write the code that it's safe, to probably have the correct test set up, to probably sometimes even there are test frameworks, they have their own timeouts, they have their own threading model, which is again different. So there's just a lot of factors that need to be considered, and anyone who's doing that, they would need a lot of knowledge of the languages, of the code, of the operating system, of everything, which is no different than a developer under any circumstances.
Yeah, and this is where controversially, I think AI and automation will never be there. Right. Again, it's that context, right? You don't know why something is happening that way. You go,
Yep.
oh, this is here's these inputs, here's these outputs, and it'll kind of roughly write you a test, which is fine. But when you start getting kind of weird and wonderful things, I think that's really good at a unit level, potentially. Anything past that, where it starts going into other interfaces, accesses the network, whatever, where you suddenly need to wait for something. It's hard. Like the Selenium community has their kind of favorite theory, not theory, yeah, theory on like these. It's the halting problem, right? It's a famous computer science theory that you to figure out if something is going to halt is near and non impossible because we don't know what signals are going to be sent out at what time. And it's still fun though, but like it doesn't mean we shouldn't stop trying not to solve it. Like it's just like we know that as a super hard problem, or in computer science terms, a P equals NP problem. It's hard. Doesn't mean it's not fun to try figure out.
I think everyone loves a good challenge.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like if people like to see that their code is being impactful. I'm using that word again. And impact could mean very different things to very different people. And like a challenge being like my impact on society is I've solved this really hard problem. Awesome. But cool. One final question that I'm gonna ask you, because like you've been growing into the space and I tend to have like I've seen it all. I'm kind of jaded in certain areas. And I think you're a lot less jaded than I am. Um, how would you like if someone came to you and said, how would you kind of navigate everything we've discussed today? Like what are the how would you start picking the tools, things like that? How do you like start at a high level?
I think that's an excellent question at the current time, because I think there are always as much as I like social media, it also tends to have a very influential tone, right? So you'll always see videos, blog posts, shorts, any content that you consume will have a tone and a nature of hyping certain things up, right? And it's always probably easy to do that. Sometimes it's organic, sometimes it's paid, you don't know. So there'll always be certain tools or frameworks which will suddenly you'll see a lot of LinkedIn posts and it'll just feel very hyped, and um you might get swayed into it and you might want to just pick it up and run with it and start trying, only to do that for a few weeks or months to realize this doesn't fit the bill, right? So
Hmm.
the way I suggest is um try to try to not drown in the noise, or try to just like be a little thick skinned about it, and trust your own good judgment, right? Understand the use case that you have in hand. What do you want to test? How do you want to test it? Probably just take a pen and paper, just throw things at it to identify what you want to test, how you want to test, um, what is the major use case that you have, what portion of an application you want to test, and then see what framework fits right? So first see, um, like any project, identify your requirements. And this could be just different. They're not the requirements that you have in terms of building your features, but what are your testing requirements and what makes the cut, right? Um, for example, say if you have a developer team, and again, developer should be writing tests. You're writing tests, if you're writing your code in JavaScript, probably just find something in JavaScript that works well for you. If you're writing something in Java, do something in Java. Don't go reinventing the wheel, probably finding a third party tool that's not in the language, forcing everyone to learn it up and just like, increasing the ramp when you're ramping up. Don't increase the incline further, right? Like try to be a little at a level, just don't make it very difficult, no matter how much challenges we love. Um, and also pretty much sync up with the team to see what skill set they have. If you're hiring, identify what skill set you want to hire for. But if you're working with the existing team, see what skill set they have or what they can pick up and what fits the bill, right? So again, I think all tools that are out there, they're there for a good reason. They're surviving for a very good reason, and they have different things to offer. Some might offer you very raw API in a standardized manner. Some might offer you, uh, some might just combine the two and offer you something which is very, very intuitive in its language. But just figure out what you think is something you can ease into. But at the end of it, just probably start. It's okay to do a POC that doesn't work out. That's the reason it's a proof of concept. If it
Yeah.
doesn't prove right, that's okay. You can shift gears. Just don't marry into it right away until you see the value in it.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and just to add one thing on top of that, I think for me, if you're using an end-to-end tool, make sure that like it understands how to do logins in a system. Really important. And to me, a login is I hit because I've been around for a long time, an HTTP. It then redirects me to HTTPS, and it is able to handle kind of those changes along the way. And iframes, like basic things. Those are important, like especially if you got like third party where you've got to sell something, which will load up in a banking iframe. Are you able to access and navigate to change it? Things like that. Obviously, my preference is always something Selenium based because then you can use real devices along the way. But if you can make sure you can do what I consider the login test, and there's a blog post on my blog about the login test, you'll be successful. I think do what's comfortable for you is the most important thing. Puja's saying, I'm saying too. So awesome. With that, I think there's nothing else that I don't think there was anything else that we needed to get through. I think this has been really insightful. Thank you as always, Puja. We will be doing this quite regularly, and hopefully we will also be pushing some of these videos out onto the BrowserStack YouTube channel on a regular cadence, as well as a separate series that I will be running with kind of Puja and other guests that will be coming out very shortly, as well as the BrowserStack newsletter quality loop. So you'll be seeing changes happening to that over the next little bit so that we can help share the knowledge that both Puja and I have and anyone else that we can get to come have a chat with us. Thank you, Puja, for doing this with me today.
Thank you, David, for having me here and just being with me here. At the same time, thank you everyone who's reached to this part of this session. I'm glad you were able to stick around to listen to us blabber for 45 minutes and hope you found something valuable out of it.